Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to being truly well-informed. Today, we're plunging into something pretty unsettling, these recent reports of syringe attacks. Specifically, the ones overshadowing that big French music festival in June 2025.
Yeah, the numbers were quite alarming. 145 victims reporting incidents, 12 arrests, multiple hospitalizations.
Yeah.
It definitely gets your attention.
It really does. And hearing numbers like that, it's hard not to feel a bit alarmed.
Absolutely.
But this deep dive isn't just about that specific festival. We want to pull back the curtain a bit on, the broader picture. Public safety, fear itself, and some of the really troubling motivations behind certain kinds of violence.
That's right.
We've got a whole stack of sources here, incident reports, expert analysis, some really quite chilling personal accounts to try and piece this puzzle together for you.
So our mission today is really to unpack all the layers here. We'll start with the immediate thing. What are these syringe attacks?
Right.
Then we'll look at some fascinating historical parallels, social panics, urban legends.
Yeah.
And then we have to confront the ideological side, the misogyny that can fuel violence, and the really dangerous role firearms often play in that. The goal is to give you a full, comprehensive picture so you can be truly informed.
Okay, so let's start there. Before we get into the wider context, let's make sure we're on the same page. Syringe attacks, needle spiking, injection spiking. What exactly are we talking about?
So, at its core, needle spiking is basically someone secretly injecting another person with some kind of unidentified sedative drug.
Secretly being the key word.
Exactly. Usually in crowded places, nightclubs, festivals, bars. The aim seems to be incapacitating someone without them realizing.
Yeah.
At least initially.
Yeah.
It's incredibly insidious.
And the scale, even if we later find out some reports aren't confirmed, the reported scale is startling.
It really is. Our sources show a big jump in reports recently. Like in the UK, just between September and December 2021, there were over 1,000 claims of spiking by injection. 1,032, I think. And then that French festival we mentioned, 145 reports. People needing hospital treatment. And it's not just those two places. Similar reports have popped up in Ireland, Belgium, Germany, Spain.
And the symptoms people describe sound terrifying, frankly.
They do. People report suddenly feeling really strange or sick or way more drunk than they should be. Disorientation, memory loss, sometimes even breathing problems or unwanted psychedelic effects. And often they find a little mark, a pinprick, maybe a scratch or a bruise, that looks like where an injection might have happened.
And legally, this is serious stuff, right? It's not just a prank.
Oh, absolutely not. Spiking someone, whether it's their drink or with a needle, is a major criminal offense. Giving someone a substance to overpower them, say for robbery or sexual assault, can mean serious prison time, up to 10 years in some cases.
Even if nothing else happens.
Even if no further harm occurs, the act itself is illegal. In needle spiking specifically, that's treated as physical assault, which carries its own severe penalties.
Okay. And the motives. I mean, why would someone do this? Our sources mentioned a few possibilities.
Yeah, the motives can be murky, but the obvious concerns are incapacitation for robbery or, disturbingly, for sexual assault.
Great.
Then there's the idea of malicious jokes, which, as we said, are incredibly dangerous and illegal.
Not funny at all.
Not remotely. And then there's a rarer, darker possibility mentioned sometimes, this sexual fetish called piquerism.
Piquerism.
Yeah, where someone gets pleasure from, penetrating skin with sharp objects. It's a really unsettling angle to consider.
Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting, maybe even confusing. Despite this flood of reports, a lot of experts are actually quite skeptical.
Yes, there's a definite undercurrent of skepticism from scientists and academics. And it creates this kind of disconnect.
So why the skepticism?
Well, it comes down to a few things. First, the practical difficulties. Professor Adam Winstock from the Global Drug Survey pointed out how incredibly hard it would be to actually inject someone discreetly through their clothes in a packed, moving club.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's not like in the movies.
Not at all. It needs a certain amount of precision, stability. It just seems unlikely to happen unnoticed, especially repeatedly to lots of people. And forensic experts tend to agree. People like John Slaughter, a forensic toxicologist, and Guy Jones from The Loop, which tests drugs at festivals, they both basically say it's much, much harder to spike someone with a needle without them knowing than it is to slip something into their drink.
Okay, so it's difficult practically. What about the evidence?
That's the other big point.
Yeah.
The forensic evidence is often, missing.
Yeah.
The UK's National Police Chiefs Council, the NPCC, looked into 274 reported cases, and they found 0 confirmed cases of drugs being injected. They found one case they called needle sticking, but couldn't confirm any drug was involved.
0 out of 274. That's striking.
It is. And in Nottingham, where there were a lot of reports, 146, I think, only one injury was found to be physically consistent with a needle prick. Just one.
Wow. Okay, so that's a huge gap between the number of reports and the physical evidence. It really makes you wonder. If it's not always a physical needle attack, what is going on? What about toxicology? Are they finding drugs in people?
That's another area of skepticism. Often, the symptoms people report feeling suddenly drunk, disoriented, sick are actually very similar to just having had too much alcohol.
Right, which can happen easily, especially if you're not keeping track.
Exactly. And self-reporting how much you've drunk isn't always accurate. Plus, toxicology tests frequently come back negative for unexpected drugs.
But couldn't that be because the tests are done too late?
That's sometimes suggested as a reason, yeah. Some drugs leave the system quickly. But the consistent lack of drug findings across many cases does raise questions for the experts.
So, if we have this flood of reports, widespread fear, but limited forensic confirmation and practical challenges, what does that suggest? It sounds like it might be more complex than just physical attacks. You mentioned historical parallels.
Yes, exactly. This is where looking at history becomes really insightful. We see these remarkable parallels with past social panics.
Social panics? Like what?
Think of things like the London Monster, back in the 18th, 19th centuries, a figure who supposedly stalked London, stabbing and cutting women.
Okay.
Or Spring-Heeled Jack in the 1830s, this almost demonic figure seen leaping over walls, breathing fire, terrified people.
Right, I've heard of him.
Then more recently, the Halifax slasher scare in 1938. Hundreds reported attacks by a razor-wielding figure. But later, most admitted they'd made it up or even hurt themselves.
Really?
Yeah. And the Mad Gasser of Mattoon in Illinois in 1944. Reports of someone spraying paralyzing gas into homes, causing illness and mass panic. Again, no culprit ever found. Lots of debate about mass hysteria.
And there were those urban myths too, right? Like needles and cinema seats.
Absolutely. The AIDS Mary legends, the fears about HIV-infected needles left on gas pump handles or in coin returns back in the 80s and 90s. It's like the underlying anxiety latches onto a contemporary fear. Then it was HIV. Now maybe it's unknown drugs.
So the fear itself can create its own reality, in a way.
Precisely. That's the psychological impact. Anxiety, stress, maybe amplified by alcohol, or the atmosphere of a crowded event can genuinely cause physical symptoms, feeling faint, dizzy, nauseous. And if there's a prevalent fear narrative, like needle spiking, it's easy to attribute those genuine physical feelings to the feared cause. That perpetuates the panic. Collective fear can manifest physically, even without a literal needle involved every time.
Oh, quite a thought. The power of shared anxiety.
It is.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit now to something deeper and frankly maybe even more disturbing. Because regardless of whether every single report of spiking is physically accurate,
Right.
these fears, this whole situation, it definitely taps into a very real, very persistent problem: misogyny and the threat of violence against women.
You've absolutely hit on a critical point there. That underlying fear is grounded in a real-world context where women do face disproportionate threats of violence.
So this isn't just about needles, potentially. It's about an environment where women feel constantly vulnerable.
Exactly. Misogyny, that basic hatred or deep-seated dislike of women, isn't just some abstract idea. It ranges from dehumanizing attitudes right through to explicit hostility. And it absolutely motivates real-world actions and shapes how society views these incidents. The fear is real because the background threat is real.
And we see this amplified online, don't we? In these communities sometimes called the manosphere.
Yes, the manosphere is this sort of loose network of websites, forums, online communities where you find a lot of shared misogynistic attitudes, anxieties about men supposedly losing status. Yeah, it's a real echo chamber.
And it's not just one monolithic group, right? There are different factions.
Correct. You've got various subgroups, often with overlapping ideas but slightly different focuses. There are the pickup artists, or PUAs. Their focus is on techniques, often manipulative ones, to seduce women.
Okay.
Then men's rights activists, MRAs. They argue that men are the primary victims of gender discrimination. You also have men going their own way, MGTOW. These are men who advocate for cutting women out of their lives, often seeing feminism as the enemy.
Right.
And then, perhaps the most extreme, are incels, involuntary celibates. These are men who blame women in society for their lack of romantic or sexual relationships. And this blame can fester into intense resentment and calls for violence.
So different groups, but often united by a sense of grievance.
Yes, that's a common thread. A shared feeling of being wronged, of male victimhood, a belief that society, and women in particular, are somehow rigged against them. And this common ground allows individuals to drift between these online spaces, potentially becoming more radicalized over time.
And the really alarming thing is how these spaces can sometimes act as a gateway, can't they? A gateway to even broader extremist movements.
That's a major concern. Misogyny can be an entry point. It can prime men who feel marginalized to accept other ideologies that blame specific groups, things like white supremacy, anti-immigrant sentiment, anti-government views.
It's like a stepping stone.
It can be. And we've seen platforms actually ban some of these forums precisely because they were actively encouraging violence against women. It shows that clear progression from resentment to outright calls for harm.
Which brings us terrifyingly to the lethal consequences. When this online hatred spills over into the real world, our sources really emphasize the role of firearms here.
Yes. For men who've become radicalized in these spaces, harboring intense hatred, firearms are, tragically, often accessible tools that allow them to turn that online hate into real-world mass violence.
It's the tool that makes the fantasy real.
In many cases, yes. Research links these perceived threats to masculinity, the sense of victimhood, the social status anxiety. It links all that to an attraction to firearms and, in some cases, fantasies of committing mass murder.
And we've seen this play out horrifically, the Isla Vista attacker in 2014.
A truly chilling example. A 22-year-old, self-identified incel. He stabbed 3 men, then drove to a sorority house, specifically choosing it, he said, because it represented everything he hated about women. He shot 3 women there, killing 2. Killed another man later, injured 14 people in total. His manifesto was explicit about his hatred of women, and he specifically called buying his first handgun his first act of preparation.
He actually wrote that.
He did. Quote, "After I picked up the handgun, I felt a new sense of power. I was now armed." It's that direct line grievance, perceived powerlessness, finding power in a weapon, then violence.
And it's not an isolated case, sadly.
No. Bloomington, Minnesota, 2019. A man threw a 5-year-old boy from a balcony, reportedly after being rejected by women. The Dayton, Ohio shooter, 2019, killed 9 people. He had a known history of violence and threats against women. Glendale, Arizona, 2020. 3 wounded by a young man targeting couples, identified as an incel. The pattern is there.
And these are just the attacks that happen. Law enforcement has stopped others.
Yes, and that's crucial too. The Queens neo-Nazi arrested in 2020, buying illegal guns, talking about forming an incel hit squad. The Hillsborough man arrested in 2021, planning a mass shooting targeting women at a university, found with illegal firearms, body armor.
So it raises that question, doesn't it? How do we stop this before it gets to that point?
It's the critical question. What we see in these online spaces is often a celebration of past attackers, creating this toxic culture that normalizes and encourages violence. And firearms are consistently the chosen instrument. It's a devastating cycle.
So pulling this all together, what does it mean for us, for society? This violence, or even just the fear of it, has a real impact, doesn't it? Especially on women.
Absolutely. It creates this pervasive sense of insecurity in public spaces. As one father, whose daughter was killed in a misogynistic attack, put it, this kind of hate-motivated violence is designed to sow fear, not just in a targeted group, but across society.
It limits people's freedom.
It does. That constant worry about safety restricts women's ability to just live their lives, participate fully in social activities. You hear comments like, girls can't do anything without fearing for our lives. That feeling is real.
And it puts a spotlight on the responsibility of venues, doesn't it?
Definitely. There's a clear duty of care. We're seeing initiatives like Safe Spaces Now pushing for changes in the live music scene. The Strawberries and Cream Festival was a pilot for that. Organizers are starting to acknowledge their responsibility extends beyond the festival gates.
And some are tackling the culture, too, like Primavera Sound.
Yeah, their move to a 50-50 gender split on their music lineups is an interesting example of addressing inequality more broadly, trying to foster a more inclusive and hopefully safer environment.
Okay, so that's the bigger picture. What about legal responses? And what can individuals actually do to stay safer?
Well, legally, things are happening. In the UK, the Home Affairs Select Committee launched an inquiry specifically into spiking.
To understand the scale of it.
Exactly. And in Ireland, the Young Fine Gael party drafted a bill to make spiking a specific crime with potentially serious jail time. So authorities are taking it more seriously.
And personal safety, what's the advice?
The advice from organizations like Frank, the Drug Education Service, and others really emphasizes planning. Know how you're getting home. Go out with friends you trust. Look out for each other.
Standard advice, but important.
Very important. Be aware of your surroundings and critically control your own drinks. Watch it being poured. Don't accept drinks from strangers you don't trust. Don't leave your drink unattended. Ever.
Trust your gut, too.
Absolutely. Trust your instincts. If a situation or a person feels wrong, get out of there. Keep your phone charged. Be cautious about meeting new people, especially if you feel vulnerable.
And if someone thinks they have been spiked or feels unsafe.
Get help immediately. Many venues now have schemes like Ask for Angela. It's a code phrase staff are trained to recognize, meaning you need help discreetly.
Okay.
Don't hesitate to seek medical attention if you feel unwell. And always, always report it to the police. Use the emergency number if you're in immediate danger, or the non-emergency line later.
Because reporting helps build a picture, right? It's vital. It helps police track patterns, gather intelligence, potentially link cases, and ultimately prevent future incidents. Even if you're unsure exactly what happened, reporting is crucial.
Okay, so we've really covered a lot today. It's been quite the journey, from those initial alarming reports of syringe attacks through the lens of historical panics and expert skepticism to really deep, disturbing roots of misogyny and how that fuels violence, especially with firearms involved. It's a complex web.
It truly is, and tackling it means looking at both things. The immediate safety concerns in clubs, bars, festivals, whether those threats are always physical or sometimes psychological.
Right.
And confronting those underlying poisonous ideologies that breed hatred and violence against women, it needs a response on multiple levels.
Understanding how these different threads connect the fear, the history, the online hate, the real-world violence, that understanding seems like a crucial first step in actually combating extremism and making public spaces safer for everyone.
So as you, our listener, reflect on this deep dive, maybe think about this. What steps can you take, or what questions can you ask in your own circles, your own communities, to help foster a safer, more aware, and more vigilant environment for absolutely everyone?